If you were on the internet in the early 2000s, specifically on sites such as DeviantArt, 4chan, or the various Buru sites, you might actually remember OS-Tan. These were essentially anime girl waifu mascots that all represented different operating systems. I recently remembered these when I was going through wallpapers from my archives, and I just remembered how prevalent they were in the early 2000s. So I wanted to do a deep dive into their origins and history, as well as all the different documented versions, and then into their transition into official mascots for Microsoft. This video is going to be broken up into multiple different categories, looking at both official, unofficial, canon, and non-canon OS-Tan. However, I do want to preface this by saying all of these OS-Tan started life as doujin, which means Fanworks. So to say that one OS-Tan is more legitimate than another one just simply isn't true. Instead, I'm going to be basing this off of how agreed upon these character designs are amongst the wider community. So personification has always been a massive part of Japanese doujin culture, and as a result a really big part of early internet culture as well. It's always just been extremely novel to personify inanimate objects and just trivial parts of life. So prior to the rise of OS-Tan in 2003, there was actually some notable personifications of operating systems.
微娘出自于 OS 偶像，在2006年由海洋堂推出。
模型优点，
肉肉的身形还原得不错。
Firstly, OS Idol Winchan. This was a mascot designed by Mina Yoshizaki for TechWin, which is a Japanese PC magazine. She may have firstly been introduced within a promotional CD from 1998. However, finding information on her is extremely difficult to come by, especially in English. Regardless, she is likely one of, if not the oldest personifications of an operating system. So starting as an official mascot, she was extremely well received. However, once the editor-in-chief for TechWin magazine actually officially discontinued her, she continued to have a second life through the likes of Fanworks such as comics, artwork, figures, music, and things like that. She actually had an official theme song called Win Was Forever, which was sung by Yui Horii, her official voice actor at the time. This was released in the October 2000 issue of TechWin magazine. In a similar vein to Winchan, we have the Princess of BST magical Touko-chan, and this character is very interesting as she is considered an outrider, which I learned means some sort of law official or enforcer or somebody who's like an authoritative figure. This character was created by Go Watanabe and T Shiozaki in 1999 and was used to promote the distribution of BSDs. BSDs, or Berkeley System Distributions, are essentially Unix-like or Unix-based operating systems which stem from the BSD OS, which was created at the University of Berkeley and was an extension of AT&T's Research Unix operating system. So yes, technically in 1999, two Japanese men made an anime waifu mascot that indirectly represented the work of an American university. And finally, the last notable pre-OS-Tan personification of an operating system would be Toy's iMac Girl. This was a mascot released by Satoru Igarashi between 1998 and 1999 through a series of wallpapers. These were a playful representation of the Mac systems released around that period, featuring them as girls, and they were extremely successful online. The start of OS-Tan really begins with Futaba Channel, also known as 2chan. This website forms the basis for websites such as 4chan or 7chan in the West, and is essentially an anonymous image board in which users don't need to register, and all of the conversations are separated by category. And as a result of having specific categories, there was a sense of culture that develops between them, forming in-jokes and memes and repeated things that people post on a regular basis. Something of prominence within 2chan was the comic writing. Comics were extremely popular, especially on the channel, which was for 2D art. Over time, there were so many comics and memes shared on 2chan that they developed their own set of characters, jokes, and storylines that would repeat amongst artists. The closest thing we have to this in the West would be something like Rage comics or like Soy and Wojaks, where if I draw a Soy Jack and show it to someone else who knows what their character is, they can recognize it, know what that character represents, even though neither of us officially own that character. This brings us to Toshiaka. This character is represented as a college-age man with brown hair and glasses who lives alone and likes computers, and was essentially an anon character, which was basically like a stand-in, so when people would see that character they would self-insert them as that character. Sometime in the summer of 2003, various artists developed a set of comics in which Toshiaka had a PC, and all of his operating systems were personified as anime girls. Nobody knows why this was, and it was never explained why they chose to do this, or why they were women, but these original characters were the original OS-Tan characters. So the original set of designs include OS-Tans for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS, and these form the basis for which the entire fandom was built up off of. Within the comics, all the OS-Tan refer to Toshiaka as their master, and they all live with him, which leads to various antics and story scenarios. So something of note about the original set of OS-Tan characters, which laid out the foundations for all future ones, was that every single OS-Tan character would represent their operating system through a set of character traits. So for example, Windows Millennium Edition was released and was considered one of the most unstable and unreliable operating systems ever made. It was prone to crashes, failing, and lots of issues. As a result, the corresponding OS-Tan for this, which was Mi-Tan, is a ditzy, clumsy girl who tries really hard at what she does but always ends up failing, and this was a really fun way of representing the operating system. So Mi-Tan is considered to be the first OS-Tan, as she was the original design that most people saw. So for her depiction, she has green hair, a maid costume, and she wears a Windows error symbol as a brooch around her neck. This is to further represent the unreliability of the system. She's also shown wielding a scallion, which is a reference to Neji's, which is a really popular IP filtering and antivirus software from Japan around that time, and she uses a scallion to like fight off malware attacks. She's also sometimes shown with a crowbar, and I'm not entirely sure what this represents. However, considering that she came out in 2003 and Half-Life came out in 1998, it could be a reference to our favorite Black Mesa researcher. So with Mi-Tan out of the way, let's take a look at all of the remaining Canon OS-Tan. And for Canon, I'm referring to OS-Tan which are widely and universally agreed upon amongst artists within the community. So there are OS-Tan designs, however, some of them will not be agreed upon by all artists. Even if the design is from a Japanese artist, if it is not properly supported and not properly widely agreed upon, I will not consider it a Canon OS-Tan.
Hello, I'm Bill Gates, Chairman of Microsoft. In this video, you're going to see the future, Windows.
So starting with Windows 3.1, we have 3.1-Tan. So the initial depiction of 3.1-Tan was one which featured a anime girl piloting a mech box, the anime girl representing Microsoft DOS, which the operating system required to run on, and the mech box representing Windows 3.1. However, the design that was actually accepted as the canon depiction of 3.1 within the OS-Tan community was one of a frail girl wearing a gown with grey hair who had a 3.1 brooch on her gown. So as for the DOS representation, this was represented initially with something called DOS Kitty, which was basically just a small black cat that was always with her and was kind of inseparable. This implied the connection between Windows 3.1 and DOS, which it required to work. However, sometimes you can actually see DOS Kitty represented as a small black cat girl with like a maid outfit. However, you will usually see 3.1-Tan with DOS accompanying her. So as for her personality, originally when she came out, she was depicted as extremely shy and extremely quiet and quite serious. Throughout time, this kind of changed, and she's now seen as a more cheerful and positive OS-Tan. So next up we have NT-Tan, also sometimes referred to as NT Mama. She's seen as like a maternal figure that cares over the other modern Windows operating systems. This is because Microsoft Windows NT formed the foundation of which most modern Windows operating systems were based off of. So she's often depicted with purple hair, purple eyes, and either a purple or pink dress, and she's seen as like a no-nonsense, caring character that just really cares about the other OS-Tans, and quite a gentle character. However, she can from time to time be seen as a fierce protector, and usually to do this she's given a sword to do so.
Tell me a sound that's better than this.
Highlighting the distinctive traits of Windows 95, we have 95-Tan. She's depicted as a traditional lady from modern Japan, which is to reference the fact that Windows 95 is an older yet modern version of Windows. So she's usually shown as like a calm and gentle, refined woman with brown hair, a pink kimono, and a umbrella. So the pattern of her kimono is actually based off of a wallpaper called hana256.bmp, which only came with the Japanese version of Windows 95. So overall she's supposed to depict like the average college girl between the Meiji and Taisho period within Japan. So within the comic she's shown to be drinking tea, tending to zen gardens, flower arranging, just very like traditional hobbies. So one common thing that you'll see throughout the comics is that she's often shown given difficulty with modern technology devices, usually things that came after Windows 95. So you often see her struggling with things like USB devices or broadband technology and things like that. So despite being depicted as a gentle and calm character, she's also seen to have intense aggression towards all of the Mac-Tans. This is to reference the fact that Windows 95 was the operating system that allowed Microsoft to establish dominance over the PC computing space over Apple specifically.
IBM 系と Apple コンピュータ系の2つになりますが、シェアを見ますと IBM 系が8割以上を占めております。そのほとんどのユーザーはすでに Windows 3.1 という基本ソフトを使っておりまして。
Following, we have CE-Tan, who represents Windows CE or Windows Compact Embedded. Windows CE was an operating system that was developed for mobile computing devices and low power devices, so things like ATMs, mobile phones, broadband devices, things like that. So as a result, CE-Tan shares a lot of similarities with the operating system. She is seen as a small, pocket-sized fairy with clear wings and orange hair. She also has a USB-shaped like staff that she uses like a magic wand, and not much is known about her other than the fact she's like joyous and flies around and is like a fairy. So the last thing of note about her is that she's often called a pest by the other OS-Tans and is usually seen with a Sega Dreamcast. The point of this is because the Sega Dreamcast actually uses a modified version of Windows CE for its operating system.
Ready? What? Q&A.
Next up we have Inu-T, which represents Windows NT Workstation. Windows NT Workstation was essentially an operating system designed for people who wanted good performance that was extremely low power, didn't need a lot of features, ran really well, and was like fail-safe. And as a result, the Windows NT Tan, who is called Inu-T, is a dog. Within her design, she has a collar, blue fluffy hair that blends into like floppy dog ears. She's seen essentially just like a dog anime girl. And she also wears like gloves and boots with like paw prints on them. So her depiction as a dog is to represent the fact that she's reliable and lovable yet very simple. And the Inu in her name literally just means dog in Japanese. So she's often depicted literally just like a dog, and at one point actually Pink Company produced a figure of her in which she had a dog bowl.
Let's plug it in. It's going to say, hey, I see you've plugged in a new device, and it's going to load in the appropriate drivers. You'll notice that this scanner build, whoa.
Next up we have 98Tan and 98SE-Tan. I'm referring to these two together as they are considered a duo and are often seen with each other. Both being a DOS-based operating system, we continue the depiction of anime girls piloting a mech box, where 98Tan has a blue mech box and 98SE-Tan has a green mech box. Both have schoolgirl outfits and both have Windows logos and 98s branded across their outfits. One thing you may notice is that the mech boxes are drawn with like stick limbs. This is a reference to the Vulcan 3000 toy from the anime series Zatch Bell. This use of stick-limbed boxes is actually a holdover from the extremely early days of the fandom, in which stick-limbed boxes were used as like placeholders before the fandom had agreed upon a design for that OS-Tan. So following our duo, we have one of my favorite OS-Tans, who is Windows 2000-Tan, often shortened to just 2K-Tan. So Windows 2000 was promoted as being the most reliable, stable, advanced, and secure operating system that Microsoft had ever produced up until that point. So the depiction of 2K-Tan is one for Windows 2000 Professional, in which she's seen as a smart, intelligent girl, and she also has these sort of like cyber cat ears and a lot of like cyber mechanical parts as part of her design. So the reason why she has cat ears is because there's a pun where 2K, which is the shortened acronym for the operating system, in Japanese is Nikke, and Nyake is like a meowing cat sound, so they just made her a cat. So due to the opinion around the time that Windows 2000 was the best operating system that had been produced so far by Microsoft, she's depicted as a very stable, sensible, intelligent character who cares for the other ones and is seen as like an older sister or like dependable woman to the other OS-Tans. And because Windows 2K was released around the same time as Windows ME, and Windows ME was famously unstable and unreliable, and 2K was famously stable and reliable, 2K-Tan is often seen as like a protector of Windows ME, and you can often see them paired together in fan art. So the next two OS-Tan we have to talk about are similar to 98 and 98 SE-Tan, considering that they are also a duo, and they are two from the XP family, Windows XP Home and Professional, both released in 2001. Succeeding both Windows 2000 and Windows ME, Windows XP provided a lot of performance improvements as well as new features, and was considered one of the best well-received operating systems of all time. So the first interpretation is called Saseko, who is a representation of the professional version of Windows XP. So Saseko is shown as a dark-haired girl with Windows XP ribbons in her hair. So the reason why there is so much artwork of specifically XP-Tan is in 2014, Microsoft actually extended support for Windows XP through the use of service packs, and as a result of this new life, it breathed a whole new breath into the XP-Tan fanbase. So the second variation is called Homeko, who is the counterpart to the Saseko XP-Tan, and she's shown as a quiet girl who is actually a doujinshi artist. So the last on our list from our Windows OS-Tans from this Canon section would be Windows 2003 Server Edition. She is also known as Saba-Tan. Saba-Tan is often shown as a half girl, half fish character, and she's often shown with various networking things. So she has a headband made out of like an Ethernet hub, she has an Ethernet cable as a belt and things like that. This is all just to connote the use that Windows 2003 Server was for server-based networking environments. So the reason why she is a half girl, half fish is because the word for server in Japanese is Saba, and the word for mackerel in Japanese is Saba. So as a result, people found it funny that they sounded kind of similar, so they made a half fish. And in one episode of the comics, you can actually see Windows 95 Tan getting ready to cook and eat Saba-Tan. So for every Windows operating system after Windows Server 2003, these will technically fall under the official category, as this is the point in time where Microsoft actually started to take notice of these OS-Tans and decided to try and use them for their own marketing materials. The only one that we will not see in either canon or official is Vista-Tan. So similarly to how Windows Vista was an operating system that was not extremely well received and was one that people couldn't really agree on as a good operating system,
Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer says that sales of Windows Vista have indeed been disappointing, and he says piracy is the reason. See, now I would have thought the problem lay with the multiple confusing editions of Windows Vista, the incredibly high price of the new operating system, coupled with the cost of the new hardware you'll need in order to run it, the fact that it's hard to pinpoint what benefits, if any, it offers over Windows XP, and widespread reports of compatibility problems with everything from video games to iTunes. You know, when you think of it that way, you kind of have to wonder who would even want to steal it.
There was no official design or canon design that was agreed upon by its users. You had two extremely popular designs from Futaba, Vispu and Vistake. However, neither of these really look like Windows Vista at all, and even still, neither of these designs were actually agreed upon amongst the community. Alternatively, a different image board called Nijiura came up with a design called Shivis-Tan, which in my personal opinion, I feel like is the best depiction of Windows Vista as an OS-Tan, as I feel like she actually looks like Windows Vista. She's depicted as like a magical girl, and that's shown throughout her theming. This was supposed to be with like the new Windows Aero themes that Windows Vista was using around that time. However, none of these designs were agreed upon, which is why I can't put this character in either canon or official.
With one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
And speaking of Nijiura, let's move on to the Mac OS-Tans, as Nijiura is responsible for all of the prominent designs. So on Futaba channel, you would see various depictions of different Windows operating systems. However, for Mac, you only saw one, which was just Mac-Tan. Mac-Tan was depicted as a blonde girl in a white bodysuit who had a half-eaten apple, which obviously represented the Apple logo, and she also sometimes had a bomb, which referenced the error symbol from the classic Mac operating system. So due to the fact that Mac-Tan was a catch-all OS-Tan for the Mac operating system, a different image board called Nijiura, as mentioned previously, decided to take it in their own hands to make their own versions of the Mac OS-Tans. So Nijiura is kind of similar to Futaba, however, the difference with this image board is they have a lot more of a focus on 3D work, wallpapers, CGI, things like that, whereas Futaba is more like 2D art. So the Mac OS X line of operating systems was named after big cats, and as a result, Nijiura developed various OS-Tans which just simply used this name as the inspiration. I'll save you the descriptions of each of them because they're pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, these can be considered canon because you could find these OS-Tan designs on both Nijiura and Futaba channel.
I'm so glad we could help this woman because she called us specifically because she wanted to be able to go take those courses at MATC, and she bought a new laptop to be able to do that. That's when she called me. She thought her laptop was coming with Windows. Instead, she got that thing called Ubuntu. Pronunciation was the least of her problems.
If you're wondering about the Linux operating system, there are two OS-Tans we can consider canon for Linux, these being Linux and Linspire. So due to the way that Linux has so many different distributions, so many different flavors, there have been countless OS-Tan designs for each specific distribution. But this also means that none of these designs had been agreed upon because there's simply too many to go through. As a result, the two that you have are Linux and Linspire. So the very first design for Linux-Tan was one of Kami-Tux, which was a bearded penguin, obviously taking inspiration from the Tux mascot, which is the official mascot of Linux. However, the most popular design was one of a young girl with purple hair, red eyes, a blue dress, and like flipper shoes, obviously representing the penguin mascot. So her design actually references a lot of specific things about Linux operating system. So you have the K from the KDE logo on her helmet and the GNOME footprint logo on her dress. Both of these are very popular desktop environments for Linux. So in terms of her personality, she's considered extremely optimistic. This is a reference to the fact that Linux is an open source operating system that relies on collaboration. And this can also be seen through her personality. She's very trusting and collaborates with all the various OS-Tans. She's also extremely invested in helping older OS-Tans as well as like abandoned computers and things like that. So the other Linux-based OS-Tan would be Linspire. Linspire was an operating system which is paid for, which is unlike any other Linux-based operating system and focused on an extremely easy to use user environment. Previously, it used to be called Lindows, as it was essentially like a Linux alternative to Windows. So she's represented as a girl with green hair, often also called a scallion girl, as often this hair color is representative of scallions, the vegetable. So there's two renditions. There's one of her where she's more casual, and there's one where she's more formal in like a red Chinese dress. The red Chinese dress version is supposed to be her current self as Linspire, and the more casual version is back when she was a Lindows. However, you can see both of these OS-Tans being used interchangeably. So she's considered a rival with ME-Tan, and that's because both ME-Tan and Linspire-Tan are both scallion girls with scallion colored hair. They also both wield scallions and often fight each other with them. So the last of our OS-Tans will be DOS-Tan, which is a disk-based operating system made for use with IBM PCs. So prior to the invention of DOS-less operating systems such as what we have today, as mentioned previously, operating systems would require DOS to run. This was essentially like a backbone operating system that allowed programs, features, and other operating systems to run on it. So despite the fact that for specific operating systems we have a pairing of, for example, DOS Kitty, who is either represented as a physical cat or like a cat girl, or for other operating systems we see a box with an anime girl piloting it. For MS-DOS specifically, they actually have their own DOS-Tan. She's usually represented as a shy schoolgirl with black hair, often wearing black, and you can often see her like peeking around corners or in the background or like just slightly out of sight. This is to reference the fact that DOS was always there, like always present and required to run. So this representation was one where she's seen as just slightly out of reach all the time. So she originally represented the DOS prompt itself, and in some artwork you can actually see her with an armband that says prompt on it. Finally, this brings us to our non-OS-Tan Tan characters. These represent things such as pieces of software, things like this to do with computers that are not specifically operating systems, but still have a canonized character within the community. Starting with McAfee Antivirus. McAfee Antivirus was and still is one of the most popular antivirus software for PCs, and especially during the peak periods of the OS-Tan fandom, McAfee was extremely popular. Despite being like an agreed upon canon character, artwork of McAfee-Tan is quite rare. However, she is depicted as a tall, blonde woman. She can also be seen wearing like periodic European wear, and sometimes with a monocle. She's supposed to be like smart and very serious, but she's always depicted with the red-yellow color scheme, which is the color scheme used of McAfee Antivirus. So next up is Firefox-Tan, who is usually represented as a Japanese fox spirit. However, the Mozilla FAQ actually states that Firefox is based off of a breed of red panda. However, the OS-Tan community simply just depicts this as like either a fox or a fox girl. And finally, best friends with Firefox-Tan, we have Thunderbird. Thunderbird is also made by Mozilla and was and still kind of is an extremely popular emailing client that is entirely free to use. Thunderbird-Tan is depicted as a short anime girl with silver hair, usually wearing a leotard, and her overall like depiction is one of like a telephone operator. You can usually see her with like a keyboard or a phone and usually letters and things like that. It's just to imply her role as sort of like a messenger. So when setting out to make this video, I made a decision not to include the OS-Kuns, which are male counterparts for the OS-Tans. However, there is one which I think is important to mention. Dr. Norton represents Norton Antivirus, which, similarly to McAfee, was an extremely popular antivirus software around the same time period that OS-Tan was popular. The reason why I feel like it's important to mention him is that you will see him in most of the artwork and comics from around that time period. In terms of his personality, he was pretty much just a doctor to the OS-Tan characters. So with our canon OS-Tans out the way, we still have not yet spoken about the official OS-Tans for Windows 7 through till 10. However, before I talk about these, there are a couple topics of interest I think are important to discuss first. Firstly, Troubled Windows. Troubled Windows was a fan animation which was essentially like a parody anime intro for a OS-Tan based anime that was released in 2004. It was extremely popular. It was a flash animation and blew up insanely quickly and was essentially the main reason why the fandom was successful in the first place. Within this animation, you can see all of the agreed upon character designs, and for this to come out just a year after the original inception of OS-Tans is kind of insane to think about. But this animation was the main catalyst for the growth of the fandom and the entire OS-Tan community as a whole. People really wanted a real show of this and really tried to make Microsoft do it. However, nothing really came of it. So it's honestly really easy to look past that without this specific animation, the chances of people knowing about this fandom outside Japan is extremely slim, and the chances of me making a video about this is even slimmer. Not only that, but the whole concept of official OS-Tans or official mascots in this sense purely wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for this specific animation. The community fully embraced the hype around the Troubled Windows animation, and for a time you could find animations and video content to do with OS-Tans everywhere across the internet. Their prominence on early YouTube and video sharing sites is really something to be admired. Of course, you had the original Troubled Windows animation, but you had some extremely notable other animations as well. There was the Princess Brave alternative version that made use of a different song. There was the OS-Tan video, which was essentially an anime outro this time instead of an intro. And there was, of course, the OS-Tan Idol Master music video, which featured cameos from all of our favorite OS-Tan characters. For a time, there was hundreds, if not thousands, of fan animations and fan videos of OS-Tan that you could find online. A lot of this stuff is kind of unknown and lost forever, and a lot of this stuff is lost media, but it's really important to just look back at how big this was. A big aspect of this or any doujin fandom would really just be the fanworks that came out around the time, specifically the manga, figures, and artwork. Around the 2000s, you could honestly find OS-Tan things everywhere, specifically at Comic-Cons, especially places like Comiket in Japan, which is effectively the biggest Japanese anime convention.
Endless piles of manga comic books as far as the eye can see. This is the world's largest comic convention, a huge event that draws over 500,000 visitors. They come to buy these comic books and magazines, all privately produced by amateur writers and fan groups. The vast size of this event shows the energy and scale of the world of manga, Japan's unique version of the comic book, and an aspect of Japanese pop culture that now has a large international following.
And due to the success of the Troubled Windows animation, the Troubled Windows name was used in a lot of this doujin work. So you could find figures which were labeled Troubled Windows, you could find posters, doujin manga, comics, things like that, all labeled Troubled Windows. I have been able to find some things archived as well as some scans, such as the Troubled Windows or OS-Tan fan book, which I found on archive.org. From time to time on places like Yahoo Auction or Mercari, you will see the occasional piece of authentic OS-Tan doujin work from the original 2000s pop up for sale. Despite this, the only lists I could find on this topic was that on the OS-Tan wiki. This categorizes 6 manga works split amongst 2 different categories. Artwork is probably the richest asset to come out of the OS-Tan fandom, as you can still find most of it readily available online, and people are still producing a lot of it to this day. Due to the longevity and the ease of archivability on places like the Buru sites, it's extremely easy to go back and find authentic pieces of art from the 2000s from when this fandom was at its peak. One also really cool thing about this is you can actually see like authentic comments from the time period of genuine people who were really interested in the fandom back in like 2004, 2005, and it is honestly quite a sweet thing to see, like just this archived piece of internet history. As for OS-Tan figures, many have been produced over the years, most of which were doujinshi works, with a couple being produced by big name brands in Japan. MyFigureCollection.net has a pretty substantial record of some of them, counting 87 in total. However, the actual number is likely much higher than this. Out of what they have on their website, they not only have finished figures as well as information about when they were released, who made them, how many were produced, and how much they cost, but they also have information on things like draft figures or incomplete figures, work in process figures, and it's so cool to just look at this stuff, and I'm really thankful that websites like this exist. Out of all of the ones listed, I have to say that this Mitan figure from 2005 is my absolute favorite. I feel like it just perfectly encapsulates the energy, aesthetic, and vibe of what being on the internet was like in the early 2000s, and one day I will finally own one myself. That being said, for a niche, old, and not very popular fandom anymore, these figures are not cheap at all. They range anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple thousand for each used figure, as most people who collect these figures are genuinely fanatical about them. Finally, bringing us around to cosplay, as with all Japanese fandoms, especially in the 2000s, cosplay was insanely popular, and usually at the time that involved making your own cosplay yourself. However, the brand Pink Company, which did actually produce some figures as well, produced a line of Emi-Tan made costume cosplays, which were insanely accurate and authentic. Around the time they sold for 15,000 yen, which translates to about £80. And the OS-Tan wiki actually has an archive of images uploaded throughout the years, which you can sort through by category. One of my favorite ones to look at is cosplay, because it really just reminds me of what the anime community and the internet communities back at this point in time were really about, which was just about having fun. And I miss this. I miss this style of cosplay so much, because cosplay today feels more like a beauty pageant than it is about representing a cool fan base or cool character. And yeah, I just thought it'd be really important to mention. There's some really cool photos from this time period, and it's honestly kind of interesting to wonder what these people might be up to now. Whilst going through these cosplay photos, I came across one which to me was very interesting. This picture of girls performing on stage dressed as Mitan, Saseko, and Touko-tan. Now, considering this is clearly a live event and this photo is taken from a crowd perspective, I was assuming that somewhere online there would be a video of this event. I went through YouTube looking for OS-Tan videos till I came across an OS-Tan playlist featuring a bunch of videos throughout the years, one of which was titled Hare Hare Yukai Live, with our girls performing live. I started watching this and I was immediately amazed by this. What is this event? Why are they cosplaying as OS-Tans? Why does someone throw a bottle directly at Touko-Tan before they even start performing? Why is the crowd so insanely into it? I just wanted to know as much as I could about this. I checked the description and found this link, 5strings.com/ppp. I did some more digging and came across the following things. Firstly, more videos. I found a lot more videos of this group performing whilst cosplaying OS-Tan, including one where they appear to do like a show opener, and they start the show by playing the OS startup sounds for each OS-Tan character.
起動です。
聞いたことない。
今すぐ行くドゥンドゥン。
Secondly, I came across somebody's personal blog which linked to this 5strings.com/ppp site. So from this, I learned that OS-Tan was clearly this group's like thing or their shtick. I also learned that this group is called PukiPukiPayo, which is probably what the PPP stands for in that URL that I found in the description. And finally, I got a rough title for the event. I had a further look through his blog and found that he had attended this event more than once and this group was there multiple times. So this group was kind of on a roll doing this OS-Tan idol group thing. I also decided to investigate the website, which is now down, and by using the Wayback Machine, I found the following pages and information. At this point, my interest was truly piqued. I had discovered an OS-Tan idol group that was performing for multiple years in a row and made their entire thing being OS-Tan characters. I wanted to know as much as I could about this, and given that I don't know anything about Japanese idol culture, I decided to reach out and enlist the help of Alex Pinku, an idol and longtime idol fan who was more than happy to help me with this video and to help me fill in the blanks.
I am Alex. I go by Alex Pinku online. I am both a music artist, idol. I make YouTube videos. I used to stream. I'm hoping to stream again sometime soon. But everything I do is centered really around my love for Japanese idols and performance culture in general. Happy to give my knowledge.
The first thing I asked about was really just about this chanting that I seem to find in every single clip of this group performing. For a group that to me would have been considered a small and niche group, it seemed like the crowd were insanely into every single performance.
But at that time, like in 2005, 2006 is when, I don't know if you've heard of the group AKB48, they were really starting to get popular in Japan. And so the fans of that group are what most people attribute to the popularization of being like an idol fan and like what that means. And these types of calls, the pen lights, all of that stuff that you're seeing was like, that was like when it was first like really booming. So it makes sense that even at this like anime song event, people were still mimicking that kind of culture. The way that it kind of works is that there are a handful of calls, fan chants, you can call them a variety of different things, that the crowd will do at certain points of a song. And to me, the way that I've always described it is it's a way for the crowd to give energy to the person who's performing so that they can then give energy back. It's like a very symbiotic thing of like, showing that you're paying attention, showing that you're interested in what's happening, right? It makes it so that to me, like if you go to a concert, everybody's just singing the song the whole time. Like that's not as fun, right? Like it still puts an emphasis on the performer, but it's like supporting them in a way. And so these calls sort of developed to be very like plug and play almost.
For example, this event which we saw, which obviously was not this group's concert, like there was going to be a lot of different groups there. Those calls allow people, even if you don't know the song at all, to still interact with them, right?
Yes. And I will say as a performer, like, especially because, you know, a lot of the performances I do are like anime conventions and a lot of people still don't know about idol stuff. But when there's one person that like knows the calls and is like screaming them, it really does give you more energy than you thought you could have to like push the performance even further.
What I want to ask is, this is kind of like two questions in one. The first one is, around this period, how common was it for idol groups such as this one to have their whole thing be, we are dressed up as these specific characters every single time? How common was that? And then the second part of that is, when it comes down to like these cosplays, would that be decided by the individuals, or would that be decided by like your fans or your agency? Like who chooses that?
When it comes to how common is this sort of thing, I will say idol groups love a gimmick. Like a lot of the time, especially in like the 2000s and early 2010s, it was very like, we are the hamburger idol group and each member is an ingredient in a hamburger. You know what I mean? Like they loved doing stuff like that. That kind of thing doesn't happen a ton anymore. I mean, they always have like a brand and a theme, but especially in like the mid 2000s, it was like, this is our thing and this is what we're doing. And so I wouldn't be shocked if a group existed that was just cosplaying one particular thing. I am interested in who owns this particular IP because cosplay idols don't really exist in Japan because copyright is so crazy.
This group, like, they would open the show with like Windows startup sounds. They would introduce themselves as like Mi-Tan, 98-Tan, like as the operating systems.
Right, like I am this character.
Yeah, these characters, like the OS-Tan characters, are not owned by Microsoft. They still demonstrate IP of Microsoft.
To me, it's kind of like I really am thinking about Vocaloid in this way because it's kind of similar. I wouldn't say it's incredibly common, which is why I'm kind of like, oh, it's probably not explicitly an idol thing, but it's very idol adjacent and like anime song adjacent, and it's common enough that people are able to like be like, oh yeah, this is the idol version of these OS girls, and that's really fun. Without being like, and we're a formal group trying to get signed by, you know, whatever it might be. We're just celebrating this thing we like.
When I sent you the links to their website that was on Wayback Machine, the link was 5strings.com/PPP. The 5 strings part, I looked at that domain itself, and that never had anything. Like, whenever you accessed 5strings.com throughout history, it would just say website under construction. So I was just wondering, like, 1, have you heard of 5 strings? 2, can we assume this is like their agency, 5 strings, because then they're given a subdirectory of /PPP? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I haven't heard of them, and I tried to look them up because I thought the same thing. To see if there was any sort of like association with something else. My guess is that 5 strings is likely the band, and then this PukiPukiPayo thing is like their other project that they do on the side in addition to like their other things, or it's the name of like a small agency that was supporting this group so that they could go do these, you know, events and whatever it might be. But yeah, I couldn't find anything on them either.
No, that's fair, because I couldn't find anything either.
But it's clearly like a sub. They were supporting this group in some way.
The bottle throwing, like, what was that?
So I mean, that's not something that's common in general. I mean, I think that fans in general get very like riled up. I mean, it happens in the West too, where people just throw stuff on stage. I actually don't know when this became popularized, but there are a particular type of glow sticks that are used in idol performances that like glow super bright for a very short amount of time that you use in like very emotional parts of a song generally, or like the like climax of a song. And oftentimes once that moment passes, people will throw them on stage. That's like the closest thing I can think of. And generally it is kind of frowned upon just because.
So, sorry to interrupt, but is that kind of similar to like in opera shows at the end when everybody throws like flowers on the stage?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, generally it'll still happen like during the performance rather than at the end, but yes, it's very similar to that. Or like, you know, during rock shows, people will throw water bottles, or they'll, you know.
But it's just like the video just starts and somebody just throws a bottle directly at this girl.
I know, but you can kind of see in the video that she's like shocked a little bit, and they're like, oh, please don't do that. I would guess that this, because it was like a bigger event, right, that they clearly were not the only performer at, maybe it was the middle of the show, so like the energy was whatever, and they just decided to do that. But yeah, it's definitely not like an idol thing.
No, for sure. I think my headcanon is that it was another competing group that was throwing at them.
The drama.
So with all of the Fanworks out of the way, it's time to move on to official OS-Tans. What I mean by this is, for a time, and technically still today, Microsoft have used OS-Tan mascots made by them to represent their operating systems, their software, and to essentially promote their marketing. Windows 7 was released in 2009 and was one of, if not the most popular Windows operating system of all time. It was insanely well received, it functioned amazingly well, and it had a lot of hype behind it. Nanami Madobe is technically an unofficial mascot of Windows 7. It's a really common misconception that she's official and she was the first official one, however this is not the case. The artist Wakaba came out and said that this character was made for Windows 7 Mania, which was not owned by Microsoft but was a Windows 7 promoting website. The website was owned by Techno Alliance Corp and not actually by Microsoft, but it purely existed to drive direction towards Windows 7. However, Microsoft became aware of her prevalence and aware of how successful she was as a mascot for Windows 7 Mania and decided to start officially endorsing her. So she was actually given an official theme pack by Windows, voiced by an official voice actor, in which she got her own sound effects, pictures, wallpapers, widgets, and everything in between. And this was actually bundled with the first 7,777 copies of Windows 7 Ultimate specifically in Japan. So during the promotion of Windows 7, Microsoft actually released a browser-based card game called Nanami Madobe in Heart Crisis. Now, there's basically no information about this game online. There's no recordings of gameplay or screenshots of gameplay. The only piece of information we have is an Anime News Network article from 2012. It's an extremely short article which just includes a brief description of the game. In the business card battle game, players use cards containing different attack moves for Nanami to defeat computer-related monster cards, such as a Wallpaper Pretty card that has replaced Nanami's wallpaper with a picture of her parents right before an important presentation. So other than this article and a couple pieces of promotional artwork, there is absolutely nothing about this game online. So if you know anything, please publish it online because it would be really interesting to see what this game is actually about. She also got her own fully animated advertisement made by Microsoft, which features a section explaining how to build a computer, which I really like. And I really like the case actually that they chose to use for this, and she has a picture of herself as a sticker on it.
お好みの自作パソコンを皆さんも作っちゃいましょう。すーこわ触って動く。やっぱり楽しい。かわいい。テレビも簡単。画面操作もとっても簡単。あれ
After this success, Microsoft followed suit with technically their first official anime mascots. However, these were not for OSs, these were the Bing girls. So to promote the use of the Bing search engine, Microsoft created 5 idol anime girls to represent the search engine. So the first of the Bing girls is Nanako, who's depicted as a girl next door type of girl. She's a junior in college in her mid-20s and has a sweet and gentle demeanor. She's also the best one because her birthday is September 20th and she shares her star sign with me. Next up we have Nane, who is an office lady or like a mature woman. She's usually dressed in blue and has a serious but sweet demeanor about her. We have Nana, who is like a young girl. She's very playful and high-pitched and very energetic. Now we have another Nanami, not Nanami Madobe, but an entirely different one for the Bing search engine. This character is meant to be an AI. She's very serious and robotic and she has purple hair. Now finally we have Naneo, who is a sporty tomboy type girl who's very athletic and very energetic. Now what's really cool about this is you start to see how the entire OS-Tan fandom comes full circle. Not only are these officially Microsoft mascots, but 3 out of the 5 characters are actually voiced by Idolmaster voice actors. And if you remember from earlier, one of the most prominent animations that really blew up the fandom was an Idolmaster music video. So it's honestly really cool to see it kind of come back to itself through official means. So before Windows 8, we actually received more anime waifu mascots from Microsoft. However, these were for Windows Silverlight and Windows Azure. Microsoft Silverlight is a now discontinued framework, but it was effectively Microsoft's answer to Adobe Flash. And to promote this new service, Microsoft of Taiwan created the Izawa family. These were the official mascots for Microsoft Silverlight in Taiwan. They started with Hikaru, who was the first mascot, and she was insanely popular that they decided to come out with 3 more sisters to go along with her. With the first of the Silverlight girls being Hikaru, she got the most love. There was an outpouring of Fanworks. You saw so much artwork, so much doujin work being made of this character. Next up we have Lei, who is the second youngest of the Izawa family. Next up we have Aoi. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce her name, but she is the third. She's supposed to be in her late teens and is a very serious sort of kind of like emo girl. Finally, the oldest is Yu. She's in college and is seen to be a very sweet and carefree kind of person. So the Izawa family was insanely popular in Japan and spawned an entire generation of people that cared about this software that likely would have never even paid attention to it. The girls' popularity spawned their own website that was official, made by Microsoft, for the Silverlight campaign. Their site was filled with free wallpapers, themes, songs, and all different kinds of things to do with the girls, and as a result it spawned an entirely new generation of Fanworks. They even also got their own promotional videos very similar to the Windows 7 promotional video.
无论你是用 IE、Firefox、Safari、Chrome 浏览网站都没有问题呢。小光最爱自由了，能这样跑来跑去，好高兴哦。
So the girls' website is down now, very sad. But if you used a Wayback Machine, you can see it as it was, and all of the different pieces of media that was hosted there has all been archived properly. As for Windows Azure, this was essentially, and still is running, is technically a cloud computing service where you essentially use the power of a computer not in your home to do CPU or GPU intensive tasks. So following all of the success of the official mascots, they wanted to do it again and came up with Claudia Madobe, using the same Madobe name for all of the Microsoft girls. She's actually still currently the mascot for Windows Azure in Japan. She's made multiple appearances in official pieces of media such as a webcomic, for example. There was also a video for the Developer Days conference in which she was present. They even publicly gave out her Miku Miku dance model so that people could make music videos of this character. And at Comic-Con, she was actually shown to be demonstrating Live 2D, which is a software that a lot of VTubers use nowadays to animate their 2D characters. And also based off of the webcomic, there was actually a series of animations produced that have been re-uploaded various times by different YouTubers. With Claudia Madobe mentioned, I want to talk about these animated videos as they include Nanami Madobe from the Windows 7 mascot, but I didn't want to mention it there as I hadn't explained who Claudia was yet, so I thought I'd mention it here. It's essentially an animated series of very short videos showing Nanami and Claudia working at a tech shop in central Japan. They're doing various things like helping people with their computers or fixing problems and things like that. And it's honestly so surreal to see that this is an official piece produced by Microsoft. Like, it's not Fanworks, and it really feels like it, but it's official. Now, with all of these out of the way, it's time to move on to the first official and real OS-Tan mascots made and endorsed by Microsoft. Previously, we've had mascots for other pieces of software and services, and we've had fan mascots that have been endorsed by Microsoft, but now Microsoft are getting to the point where they're actually making their own OS-Tans. For Windows 8, we actually got two mascots, two Madobe sisters, I and U. Windows 8 was released in 2012 and was supposed to be a good for all type operating system. It was supposed to work on mobile devices, tablets, computers, projectors, and it was honestly quite badly received. If you used it at the time, a lot of people preferred to use Windows 7 over it just because of how different it was to Windows 7. So they really tried to hype up these characters, firstly putting them as silhouettes in the background of a music video, then putting them within an article about Windows 8. This brings us round to our first wave of official OS-Tan merch by Microsoft. So you could buy two official versions of Windows 8 DSP, which involved theme packs based around the two girls. And for a time, you could actually buy a limited edition version of these Windows 8 DSPs, which came with additional voice packs, as well as an official Microsoft Wedge mouse with a graphic of the OS-Tan mascots on them. Let me just say this, as someone who has 100% legally my whole life always bought Windows, if they tomorrow released a version of Windows 11 with anime girl packaging and I could walk down the street and buy it, I would do that immediately. I think it's such a cool idea, and it's really easy to see how tiny marketing strategies like this and just adding a little bit of character to something that is typically so boring and monotonous can make it so much more appealing and actually make people want to spend money. Now, we're finally getting to more recent operating systems, and sadly, our last official OS-Tan mascot from Microsoft, that being Windows 10 Tan, also known as Madobe Touko. Windows 10 doesn't need much introduction. Chances are you've either used it or are even still using it. A lot of people prefer it to Windows 11. So first announced by Windows Navi in 2015, this was an unnamed mascot which involved a bio about her, and it also promoted a competition where people were allowed to decide on a winning name. After the competition was finalized in July, they announced that her name was going to be Touko.
And this girl with white and light blue hair, she's the personification personification of Windows 10. There's a contest for fans to give her a name. She has a backstory. She's 17 years old and is visiting from 100 years in the future. So I guess Windows 10 is going to be around for a long, long time.
Microsoft really embraced the people's love for this character. They even produced a Madobe family voice drama, which include all of the current existing Madobe family characters. Now, this brings me to kind of an anticlimactic ending. We do not have a Windows 11 OS-Tan, either an agreed upon Doujin one or an official one from Microsoft, and I personally don't think we ever will get one. See, despite how successful these OS-Tans have been, it's very obvious that Microsoft doesn't really seem to care about them anymore. And there's a lot of reasons to that. One of which is that I feel that these characters that Microsoft made, whilst cool, did not have anything on the original designs that Futaba Channel and Nijira came out with. Because they made official characters, it discouraged people from making their own ones. Why would I make my own OS-Tan if I know that Microsoft may make their own one and it will immediately replace the one that I've created? Not only that, but there's a lot of charm about the original designs that really is lost. A lot of them are kind of just generic anime girls now. However, the original charm of the original OS-Tans was they represented their operating systems unapologetically. Again, Mi-Tan is a really big one here. Mi-Tan represented an extremely unreliable and unstable operating system, and that was present throughout her character, but that made her so charming and so lovable by everyone. And I don't think a billion-dollar corporation in their right mind would make a character that represents flaws with their product. Considering that the OS-Tan fandom is definitely at one of its smallest stages throughout its history, I do not see that there being enough people to not only come up with a design, but also to agree upon one collectively. And I also feel like this has something to do with a greater picture, which is that the time we are in right now is not a creative time. The internet now is nothing like how it used to be in the early 2000s, and I miss how it was so much. I miss how everything was stupid and silly, and everything had a character and was fun and colorful. It feels like the more creative tools we have and the more creative tools we're given by technology, the less creative we have become as people and the less creative things have been made. Instead, things are way more serious and are about money and about profit margins and things like that. And the space for being stupid or childish or silly kind of doesn't exist anymore. The reason why I say this is because if any of the pieces of technology or things we have today came out in the early 2000s, they would have had devoted fan bases, mascots, characters, anime girls. You know, all of the existing and current MacBooks would have been given their own OS-Tan anime girls. You would have had a TikTok chan or an Instagram chan or anything like that. And we don't have anything like that because the space we're in now and the time that we're in now simply is not one that allows for these things to exist anymore. That's honestly quite sad. But that being said, there is still a very dedicated community of people just like me that care about these sorts of things a lot. I want to give a massive shout out to the OS-Tan Discord, who was extremely helpful when making this video. I'm also going to provide links to not only that Discord, but 2 insanely useful and detailed resources of wikis. But there's nothing stopping us from being creative people again. So why don't you find an OS-Tan you like, make it your profile picture, and let's just relive some nostalgia together. I want to thank everybody for watching this video so much. This was a lot of fun for me to make, and I really hope I can make more videos like this. Thank you so much and have a great day.